This is my 10th Platts conference, and thank you, John. Thank you. Thank you. And for those of you who have been here for the last few years, you know that John has become the de facto chair of this event. And he does a marvelous job at it too, I think, John. Very So I was particularly excited yesterday morning when John opened the conference and he presented Erica with the aluminum frame for a 10th anniversary of this conference. I was sitting in the back of the room on the edge of my chair in anticipation that John was going to call me up next to give me an aluminum star pin to wear on my lapel. But alas, it didn't happen, John, and I had to share my disappointment with that oversight. But I think there's two other 10-year veterans here. Josie, I think you're one, right? And Dan Sullivan, are you here? You're here somewhere, but maybe not in the room. I think Dan is the third. Are there anybody else been here for the all 10? I guess that means we're getting old, Joe. All right. A little bit about Enporion. We were founded by 7 investor-owned utilities back in 2000. PPL was one, Ameren was another. We focused primarily on the procure-to-pay segment with software applications to automate that process. We were acquired by Global eProcure at the very end of 2011. And what this slide tells you is that I'm trying to keep up with Ameren and how many times I can show you the same information over again. And it also tells you that Steve Bucalo and I didn't coordinate our presentations because he presented this yesterday. Some of our customers and awards, but let's move into the topic. And the question that we ask ourselves is, what can technology do to alleviate some of the problems and opportunities that you've heard in the first two presenters here? I have to credit Platts that it was at this conference last year that the first discussions on this subject began to happen between our two companies, between Scientech and Enporion. And it happened because our booths happened to be set up right next to each other. And at a slow time, Dan Meils and I just started chatting, and we stumbled on something that we thought had some merit. And since that time, in January of 2011, there have been dozens and dozens of meetings. There have been hundreds of interviews and surveys and literally thousands of emails on the subject that has brought us to this point. And I really didn't know much about the work planning process when this started. I probably don't know much today, but I was left with this visual impression of we have work planners that do all this planning, and they put all this stuff together, and they run down the hall to this wall, and they throw it over the wall to the supply chain guys and say, okay, order all this stuff. And then they run back to their desk and they pick up their phone and start calling, where's my parts? And the supply chain guys are, they've got a bunch of expediters making calls trying to expedite parts. And it just seems like, it should be one continuum of a process, but somehow it's just disconnected. So we tried to look at this from an analytical point of view and say, well, what has to happen to make this process more connected? And from our point of view, we imposed some constraints on ourselves to say that we have to work within the existing process, that we can't allow or require additional labor to perform this function, and the function has to be performed with virtually every work management system that's out there. So those were the self-imposed constraints. And we came upon what I think was a simple solution, but perhaps more complicated to implement than meets the eye, but in two specific areas. If we can check on data at the earliest stages of work planning and check on lead times and current pricing and bring that information to the very early stages of work planning, we think we can make this process go a lot smoother. But it has to be done in an automated, proactive fashion with no extra steps on the part of the work planner. So in terms of checking data then, the first thing we're going to do is what Rapid has historically done. We're going to go out to the industry and we're going to look and see what parts are available of each line item on this bill of material. And this is meant to be a bill of material, or some of you may call it a parts list. It is in fact a real one, as an example. But we're going to go out and look at the industry, and we can see that Oak Ridge has 5 and Exelon has a total of 5 in 2 different locations. And this is what Rapid has done for years, but it has not done it in a proactive way. A work planner or a buyer would have to go out and search that inventory. And now we're talking about an integration to this work management system that's going to proactively search the Rapid database for this kind of information. So then we're going to move beyond this a little bit and start to add some other searches through Rapid for information contained in the database tables that's not currently used or widely known that Rapid could do. And we see that there's a seal on this bill of materials, and where's my mouse? This part number right here. And we're going to try and identify whoops, did I just go one step too farther? Come on. Okay. We're looking for identification of duplicate parts in this particular utilities inventory. So we're back into the enterprise, and we see if I look, I did it again, I'm sorry. I can't use the mouse. Let me just go back to that. If I look to the far right under the manufacturing part number, I see that there are really 3 different manufacturing part numbers put in here. There's probably only one manufacturing part number, but at some point somebody put a -1. That may be the real part number. Somebody may have left the -1 off. Somebody may have hit the 1 key too many times. And this is how we got 3 different part numbers for the same seal into the inventory database. So what we're going to do now is proactively combine those part numbers into the single correct part number, so you can begin to see over time we're going to proactively cleanse this database of part numbers to create a single correct part number. So then the next thing we're going to do is identify alternates or substitutions, and we can see that there are alternate parts for this particular seal out there, 2 of them from Crane, actually maybe 4 of them from Crane, and another one from Ingersoll Rand Dresser Industries. Now, you could argue that substituting a part for a nuclear safety item is now going to require engineering input, and there's a whole nother bottleneck, if you will, that's going to be that you're going to have to face in order to get through that. But if it turns out that this seal happens to have a lead time greater than the amount of time you have left between now and the time you have to start this work, at least you have alternatives, and some priorities perhaps can be established. And I'm not trying to say that what we're presenting here is a silver bullet that's going to cure all bottlenecks throughout the industry or the enterprise, but I think it's going to be a big help. So the next thing we're going to do is to verify a part description. You see I'm going to move down to this throttle bushing on this bill of material. On this bill of material, it lists it as a throttle bushing, but as I go out and search the industry database, I see other definitions and more complete definitions. And this gives you the option to make your part descriptions, again, more complete. So moving on, then, we're going to compare the bill of materials. We're going to compare the bill of material for this particular work package, which is what I have in the upper left part of the screen, to bill of material for an identical component. In this case, it's obviously a pump that exists in another power plant, and show you that, we seem to be missing an O-ring for that deflector on this particular bill of material. Well, it's possible that your pump doesn't have that O-ring, but at least we're allowing you the opportunity to check on that part so that downstream when week 0 happens and the work starts, you're not left with a part that absent from the materials to overhaul this particular pump. So once again, it gives you the option to update that bill of material. So then, I'm going to start checking the vendors now that I have a complete and accurate bill of material, and I'm going to proactively go out and send an electronic request for information to the vendors associated with the parts on this particular bill of material. And what you saw populate in a matter of seconds is probably going to take a week or maybe 10 days to 2 weeks to get that information back. And I know I've heard in our interviews that how are you guys, us guys, going to get information faster than I can get information? And do you have better relationships than I do? And the answer is no, we don't. Clearly we don't. We probably don't have as good a relationship. But what we can do is notify vendors that your response times and your predictions, the accuracy of your predictions of forecasted lead time to actual lead time are going to become scorecard metrics that we're going to keep track of. And that's going to be an important factor going into vendor performance evaluations. That's about the only hammer that we can put into this. But hopefully now, if the vendors know that this is going to be a scorecarded item, they're not going to just throw out the standard lead time that they throw out whenever they have an inquiry for a part like this. So then we're going to reorder these automatically into a descending order of lead times. And we see that we have one item here that now has a 30-week lead time, and that may end up being a critical path item. If I'm at week 16 planning work, and I now have an item that's going to take 30 weeks, I know I have a problem. It may be the same problem I have at week 10, I'm still not going to have the part, but at week 10 or week 5, I may have already let service contracts, I may already have scaffolding on site, and rescheduling or deferring that maintenance now because I don't have all the parts is more costly and more problematic. So it gives me the option to, at the early stages, to reschedule this work as necessary or try to identify an alternate source for that seal or what have you. The point is, get me good, accurate part descriptions, price information, and lead time at the earliest stages of work planning. Instead of, as Dennis said, we don't know what the real lead time is until the parts get ordered. And there's a significant time lag between that work preparation of that bill of material and when those parts get ordered. So get the information early in the process, and we're able to make better decisions. So to summarize, I think what we've created here is an iterative process that takes no extra labor on the part of the work planner, that over time will correct inventory in terms of duplicate parts and substitutable parts, which will result in reducing that inventory. I think we found in one particular plant that we looked at, 7% of the inventory was in duplicate parts. So if we could combine that, we can lower that inventory, maybe not all of that 7%, but if you can take 5% out of inventory for most utilities, that's a pretty big number. So we get more accurate pricing for budgeting purposes, hopefully reduce the amount of deferred work over time, improve the accuracy and the completeness of the bill of materials library, and overall just improve that whole end-to-end process by trying to connect those parts that are disconnected today. This is not a real product yet, but the technology that we have, I'm hopeful that by this time next year we'll have a real case study to report on how this is working. We have the technology to make it work, we just haven't completed the integrations yet, but we hope to be able to report on that soon.